continue the conversation, we're going to hold our first panel discussion for the day. This panel is on the changing role of women in business. Moderating the panel will be Gail McManus. She's the founder of the firm Private Equity Recruitment. Joining her will be 5 women who will share how their roles have changed over time. First, we have Tamara Box, Head of Structured Finance at Reed Smith. Aliya Al-Aufi, HR Business Partner at Oman Oil Company. Wendy Alexander, Deputy Dean of London Business School. Mary Dalby, Head of Customer Self-Service at Thomson Reuters. And Heather Hancock, Partner at Deloitte. So we'll begin the panel with a moderated discussion, and at the end, we'll open the floor to questions. So please join me in welcoming the panel.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Jamie, for those introductions. So first of all, you don't know how lucky you are. These are fantastic examples of women who have made it to the most senior leadership positions in a wide variety of financial and professional services. And whilst we're talking, I want you to get your questions ready, because if you don't have questions for these women later, you really shouldn't be here today. They are absolutely paramount examples of what you should be learning and listening to. So the title of our panel is The Changing Role of Women in Business. And actually what I want to retitle it to really is about the opportunity for women in senior leadership positions. And the first thing I want to do is ask all of you, do you think it's an issue? Do you think there's a real issue for women to make it into senior leadership roles today? Yes. Yes. Tamara might have a view on that. And maybe some of the others do on that too, because when we started out, we never assumed it would be an issue. So, how many of you actually are aiming for senior leadership positions in business? And how many of you just think this is totally something that you're incapable of doing and blending with a family life? And it's a reasonable thing to think. All of these women on this panel have children, lots of them. So don't let it stand in your way. The one glass ceiling that's not going to matter here is kids. But we'll talk about it, don't worry. Nothing is off limits here. Use this opportunity. So let's hear from the panel what they think. And let's find out whether things have changed since they started working in their career. Tamara, senior legal professional in the finance world as well. Has it changed in the 20 years or more that you've been working?
Typical of a lawyer, I'm going to say yes and no.
Listen and learn.
I think the short answer, is no, it really hasn't changed. What's a shame is that it looked like it had. So when I came out of law school 20 years ago, there were about 50% of my law school graduating class were women. When I went into a big New York law firm, about 50% of our starting class were women. And quite frankly, we thought that our mothers had solved the glass ceiling problem for us. Glass ceiling wasn't even a concept we discussed at all. And frankly, we progressed in the usual way through, through our associateships. And indeed, many of us made partner. But I think the problem was when you got to partnership, you suddenly looked around and thought, hang on a minute, it's not 50% anymore. In fact, in most of the big legal firms, both in the US and in the UK, it's around 12 or 13%. We like to say it's close to 20 in most firms. Indeed, happily in my firm it is. But in most firms they say it's closer to 20, but that's because they're including the non-equity partners. That would be people they call partners but don't treat as such. And funnily enough, a lot of those, a greater than ordinary, usual proportion of those are women. That says something in and of itself. So I think it really wasn't until I got about 15 years into my career that I looked around and thought, hang on, this isn't working. I made partner, and indeed I made equity partner, and that's relatively unusual. I can now see that among the few women who did that. But getting into senior leadership and actually being taken seriously, and frankly looking around and saying, are you being treated differently? I had a child quite late in my career. And the question of, are people treating me differently around their assumptions about my commitment, and really looking at some of my young associates who are working for me and watching one by one those that had children leave the profession, and thinking, well, hey, they're working for me, and I am very open to the ideas of flexible working and everything else in the world. What's happening here? And really what I think is happening here is that so many women look up the ladder, see how slippery it is, see how few women make it, see the commitment that they have to put in to do so. And we've done some fantastic research in professional services with the 30% Club and indeed with McKinsey. And one of the things that came out of that was really recognizing that the difference in perception between women and men about what it takes to get to senior leadership is huge. When you ask the men, do you have to have your job as your number one priority to get into senior leadership, the men, around 25% of them will say yes. When you ask the women, around 75% of them will say yes. So it's a perception issue as much as a reality, and I think their perceptions are based in reality. I'm not trying to tell you that the women are, going crazy. I do think in most cases women have to do twice as much to get half as far. And there are a lot of women out there that have what I call the low bullshit factor, right? Which is, I look around and think, hey, I've got a lot going on in my life. Why do I need to put up with this? I can go find something else to do. So they opt out. So I do think it's changed in some respects, and recently it's changed because we have a dialogue. We have a dialogue again as if it's the 60s, right? We're all back where we were, and we're now talking about it a lot more. So is it changing in that respect? I hope so. Has it changed in numbers? No, they've been bloody static. And it's really frightening to me that here we are, 30, 40 years later, and the numbers are the same.
Just the same. So Mary, you're in the world of high finance. Not much of a bullshit factor there then?
Not much, and being Scottish to boot. Quite a lot of the bullshit. I would say I completely agree with you, Tamara. I think things have not changed as much as we would have expected or like them to change, or indeed as much as our mothers would have expected them to change, way back when. But I think one thing that has changed is the environment in which we find ourselves. So I think the 30% Club, women on boards, etc. There's a real kind of movement to addressing this issue. And I think there's also a recognition amongst organisations that for them to succeed, they need to have the best talent, and by only looking at men and not taking females seriously, they're massively reducing the talent pool that they have available to them. So I think it's an interesting time, and it's a time that we absolutely need to take advantage of. Actually, this week in a conversation within my organisation, Thomson Reuters, we had a conversation, our leadership team, not initiated by myself, which is, what are the active steps we can take in 2013 to make sure that we have a really diverse talent pool from which to make sure that we have the right kind of gender balance going forward. I mean, for me, I sat back and thought, well, that is a sign of change. We would not be hearing that conversation maybe even 3-4 years ago. So the backdrop has changed enormously, and I think there's a real opportunity for this group to push through and take advantage of that. But again, to echo Tamara, everything in the garden is far from rosy. We don't have one global CEO of a global bank who is a female. I think only 12 out of 160 central banks are female, and it's not Germany, France, UK, etc. It's your kind of smaller developing countries. I did do a little bit of homework looking at the top, 10 Goldmans, Barclays, etc., looking at how many females do they have on their executive team, flipping through my notes. Goldman's 1 out of 11, JP Morgan 2 out of 12, HSBC 2 out of 12, Barclays 2 out of 10, UBS 0 out of 11. I could go on, but I think you're getting the picture here. So a long way to go still.
Are you depressed yet? Okay. Heather. At least you've seen the public sector as well as the professional services arena. The same or different?
Well, I think it has been a bit different. So I started my career a long time ago in the public sector. And I mean, to echo Tamara's point, the day I joined the civil service, I assumed I was going to be a permanent secretary. There was no question in my mind that that is what I had joined to become. And that was an entirely reasonable ambition to have. There was nothing particularly in the central civil service that would stand in the way of that. So I think the civil service, which was where a lot of my career had been, although I also worked in big quangos and in local government, it was more used to being gender blind. But of course it was driven by a public policy requirement around the whole equal opportunities agenda. So it wasn't only driven by the needs of the business of government, it wasn't only driven by the talent that was in the organisation, it was driven by a political requirement to show the way. I think what I would say also is that drove the public sector to be better, quicker at understanding what flexibility really looked like and to just deal with things, to understand job sharing, flexible working, actually to do it not necessarily just for women. It's very often many of those measures are just completely open to anybody to benefit from, which probably also helps the men understand the opportunities that they could open up for women who are trying to combine all kinds of different life requirements into how they think about their careers. However, having said that though, I was still a first in many of the roles that I had in the public sector. So I was the first woman to be private secretary to the Home Secretary. I was the first woman to be running one of the major quangos that I was involved in. I was the first woman to run a special local authority, a national park authority. And you kind of think, this just can't be right. That wasn't in the dark ages. So you're still blazing a trail despite that. And I think where the public and private sector are still in sync is about the challenge of the senior leadership roles. And when you talk now to the top of the civil service, they still can't quite break through the most senior jobs for women, and particularly not really putting enough women in the big, chunky senior jobs. So we all know there are kind of jobs with the same job title, but some have got more weight than others, and I think that's what's different. I think my experience in the private sector, so I've been a partner in Deloitte for 9 years now, has been one where that's an organisation which is absolutely gender blind in the sense of spotting smart people and giving them opportunities to succeed. But probably, if I observe my firm and many other organisations I deal with, probably culturally has had a bigger journey to go on about feeling comfortable with this conversation and feeling okay about doing some things about it, and that you're not making some unnatural intervention to try to help really smart women fulfil all their potential in the organisation. So I'm not sure yet that business is not interested in it as an equal opportunities agenda, and it probably serves none of us very well if we try and make them interested in it from that point of view. But I don't think yet that business, that burning platform about talent, I don't think it's burning fiercely enough to force business to do what it needs to do just yet.
Okay. Well, we're very fortunate to have Aliya here, who will have a different perspective as well, because not only is she a woman, not only is she in business, but she also operates in the Arab world. Tell us, how do you survive?
Actually, it's not all bad for us right now. There's good and there's bad, and the challenge is really how you operate between the two. The good news for women in my part of the world, and my answer is really specific to my part of the world at the moment, is that legislation has changed. There's now, in the UAE, there's laws mandating that corporations have a small percent, but a percent nonetheless, of female representation on boards. There's a lot of talk in both the public and private sector about creating more opportunities for women, about women participating. In my country, there's quite a few. There was a recent reform as part of the Arab Spring. A lot of ministers were taken out, most of them, actually all of them men, and quite a few ministers brought in, a lot of them women. So the macro environment has changed. Now, the not so good news is, okay, so while it's open and while there are more opportunities to participate, the landscape hasn't particularly changed, and the size of the pie hasn't particularly grown. So those with a distributive type mentality, it's still very competitive within the sphere that you're operating. Workplaces haven't become any more friendly for women. And then the social obligations that women have and the social norms still prevail. So while you have many, many men who are ambassadors of women in the workplace and are actively talking about their participation and the need for more, the challenge is really with the women. It's how do we manage with balancing the social agenda that's very intense and prioritizing work enough that you do stand out. For those of you who have operated in the Middle East, you'll notice that socially, women socialize with women and men socialize with men. And it's not yet a complete social norm for them to socialize with each other. A little bit, but not so much, which means these networks that are being formed, you're not accessing the power circles necessarily, which means women just have to put themselves out there a little bit more than their male counterparts to get further ahead. So while the opportunities exist, the challenges remain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So is my job easier than that of my mother, who also had a long career in the private sector? And I would say it's different. She had a very different, if I can even say, a little bit less of a conservative environment to operate in. And as the world changed, our parts of the world, many of whom are looking outward, there's many who also have gone further inward. I don't think the media helps the cause any much, because you definitely don't hear any of this on CNN or BBC. When you're abroad, you see the very real stories, but you kind of need to see both. And yeah, so good and bad. It's not all bad. I'm here.
Not all bad.
I did okay.
Well, I've got some good news for Wendy, though. We did some little straw polls across our panel, and everyone on our panel who had done an MBA felt that it allowed them, after that MBA, to take a step forward in their career. Wendy, how have you seen it in the professional and executive education arena?
Well, in the education world, it sometimes pays to take the long view, and I want to be more upbeat. I mean, 150 years ago in this country, no women would have been at university at all. 100 years ago, none of us would have had the right to vote. If we'd been having this discussion 50 years ago, we wouldn't have had an Equal Pay Act, we wouldn't have had a Sex Discrimination Act. And even just 5 years ago, we wouldn't have had the Davis report that's begun to move things forward in the non-executive space. And what I take from that is that although progress looks glacial, in fact, it is more substantial than that. And the problem or the challenge that this generation is going to collectively solve is the one of senior women not being part of the leaky pipeline. And we will do that as earlier generations of women have solved these other problems. And the reason I think we'll do it is something that Heather said about a fundamental underlying economic imperative. I mean, economic activity is moving from west to east. What the CEOs who are recruiting from LBS currently are looking for is people who can operate globally and manage global teams. They have no interest in people who can manage teams that look like them. And so we're beginning to see in the research literature, it's all about, do women make better leaders? And the answer, of course, to that is yes, because they know how to do teams. And the thing that's going to count is, can you operate globally and run a team? And potentially, I have to say, at business schools, we're trying to get better at this. You know, your IQ might get you there, but the purpose of business education is to help you strengthen and understand your EQ, because that's actually what's going to take you into a leadership position in the future. And I think the fantastic thing for women is, if you have the chance, do it early. And any young women you mentor, tell them to do it early, because we live more complicated lives than the men do very often. But even if you don't do it early, do it, because it gives you the posse that Linda talked about. And one of the good things about business education is it used to be you either did an MBA or you didn't. Now you can do it throughout your life and do executive education for really short spells that make you ready to go do those global roles, build the team globally. And I think business education remains the right arena to do that. So I'm an optimist.
Good. Well, that's a nice note to end that first part of our discussion on. So let's deal with the real issues, shall we? Kids and pay. Right. Who's got them? Kids. All of us. Let's see in the room. Okay. How many of you in the room that have got kids think that children have halted your career progression or put a stop in it? Some of you, but not all of you. And as you can see from the ladies on our panel, actually when I asked them, it was about 50-50. So at some stages it had made a difference. Aliya, as an HR professional, what's your view, looking at it from the HR side, whether kids actually halts or puts a halt in people's career progression?
I think as an HR professional, and again in my region, we're not doing enough to create workspaces that allow women to do both comfortably. So in that regard, as a profession, and I want to say globally, I think we're not doing enough. Has it halted my career progression? I don't think so. Actually, for me, it was after I had kids that I started to hit bigger jumps. It could have been timing, it could have been when I had my kids, but it was also about being able to make difficult choices and develop a very strong partnership, particularly at home. That's very important, and that's, I'm not saying that should be something you look at before you marry someone, but I'm telling you it made a big difference in mine.
Absolutely it should.
Well, I should say that my other little straw poll questions of the panel said, does your partner take 50% or more or less than 50% of the childcare responsibility? And actually, across the panel, I have to say, it was either half and half or more. There were no lesses. And there might be a point in thinking about your partner's role in your career.
Although interesting, I bet that's not because our partners don't work.
No, no, no.
Yeah, so
Okay,
don't
it is
assume
in
you
my
have to
case.
have you don't have to have a stay-at-home other half for it to
And it
work.
didn't mean stay at home either. It
No.
meant the way that it was
Way it's done.
distributed
Yeah.
amongst the family.
I think it's also about women knowing what they want. So if they choose to play in this race, then their partners have to be partners in this decision as well.
Absolutely.
And they have to be treated as partners in this decision as well. Because it not only involves us sacrificing our time, but it involves us committing their time to taking care of things when we can't. So I think there's this dilemma with women is we want to have it all and then we feel guilty for all the things that we're not doing perfectly. And the point is drop the guilt. I mean, you won't always be able to pick up your kid from school. You won't always, for example, my daughter, my youngest, just took her first steps. And that's a very special experience in any mother's life, right? But I was at London Business School when that happened, on this business trip. So I saw the picture, and technology is great because it makes you feel super guilty because you know instantly when it happens. And this past week, I'm thinking, oh, I missed it. But you know what? I missed it. Big deal. I'll be there for as many of the other things that I can be there for. But if I feel guilty, and then if I don't want to ever be in a place where I'm saying, you know, it's kind of your fault. Because sooner or later, I think they feel it. Mm. And I definitely know with my mother, there was a lot of, oh, I sacrificed a lot for you. And I'm like, thanks, but I didn't ask you to. You know, and I don't want to do that to my kids. And it's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it is what it is. And these are all choices that we make, and we live with them.
I also think that point about the discussion that happens at home with a partner, as your children get older, that discussion needs to involve your children as well. Yeah. I have teenage boys. I recently had a month's sabbatical after finishing a big project at work. At the end of it, I said to my kids, we went out for lunch, I said, well, boys, you know, I've been at home. What do you think? It's been good fun. Shall I... I wasn't really asking this question seriously. It was a test. So shall I go back and tell the boss, actually, not sure I want to carry on? Their faces fell. And they said, it would be an absolute nightmare if you were at home all the time. So you kind of... And that's partly because they understand how much enjoyment and fulfillment I get from work, and therefore they enjoy the fact that I'm working and getting that enjoyment and fulfillment. So, you know, this becomes, the older your children are, the more it becomes a team commitment to everybody being able to make the right choices and compromise to support each other.
Absolutely, and I think it actually is a discussion you should have before you get married. before you go into your kind of life with your partner, because the reality is it's the most important decision you will make. I mean, who your partner is and what partnership means in your life is the most important decision you will make. And I think if you've chosen rightly, then the point you just made about what your sons see in you should also be what your partner sees in you. I am better in the home. I am better with my son. I'm better with my husband because I get such a charge out of what I do during the day in the office. And the fact that that gives my husband a charge and that he thinks when I've done something great in the office, I'm that much more interesting to him, is really what makes our partnership work. So I think you should never discount that discussion. And what shocks me probably the most in talking to my girlfriends at my age, who are already relatively senior in their professions, is how many of them are struggling with that issue in their home lives because they never discussed it. They never talked about it with their husbands before they got married. They never talked about how would they handle childcare and child rearing, and is it a 50-50 job? Is it their job? And some of the assumptions that got made in those relationships are actually the cause of the breakdown of those relationships over time.
So, I think that was quite interesting because that's about not feeling guilty with what you do at home. But what about at work? Mary, do you feel guilty? Do you hide the fact you've got kids in the finance profession?
No. No one expects me to. I think, again, this is maybe something that's moved on. Nobody would expect me to hide the fact I've got 3 kids. I've got the photos on my desk. So do all my male colleagues have photos on their desks. We talk about each other's families, what we've done at the weekend, etc., etc. So I absolutely don't hide it. If any of my kids are ill, all of my colleagues will say, well, you've got to go home. So I think things have moved on in that regard. Certainly I work in an environment where, that's absolutely understood, encouraged, expected, etc., etc. So no, I absolutely do not hide it at all, and I never would. I think one of the things about being a female at work is kind of a level of authenticity. I cannot be somebody else. I am absolutely 100% myself at work, and I wouldn't be able to do the job if I had to pretend to be somebody else. So absolutely not.
Do you have a point, Leslie?
Yeah, I think the other thing is you can't always plan it meticulously 20 years in advance.
No.
Your partner can say, yes, I'm up for 50%, but, 10 years later when you have the twins and you're doing a different job, the conversation gets different. And I think one of the things I noticed is that I had 2 quite significant careers, one in consultancy with my business school girlfriends and one in politics. And interestingly, my business school girlfriends managed it because they made their weekends completely sacrosanct and that they were actually present and there for their children. And that's a huge contrast to politics. You can't be in high-level politics and not be available on the weekend, because for the rest of the world it's a leisure activity and they want you at conferences and things the weekend. And so thinking quite purposefully about, it's not about working hard or not working hard. It is about making a choice that works for the whole family and whether your weekends really, really matter so the children feel you're there. And the most interesting thing is that as you progress in an organisation, you're a much nicer colleague because you're not killing yourself in the weekend too, because you discover that everybody else you work with hates the single person, whether male or female, who's spending their whole weekend working, because it just raises the bar in a way that's unhelpful to everybody. So I think about weekends. And the one other thing different from our mothers is buy as much help as you possibly can. You can never have too much help. I am leaving here to go on a train home to Scotland. I have half an hour in the house before I go to the evening dinner. And I know I will put a washing in, and that's a big mistake because those 10 minutes should be with the kids, not with putting the washing in. So buy all the help that there is out there. It makes it a bit easier.
Well, that's easy then. No problem with kids, so that's not going to cause any problems in the future, is it? So let's deal with pay. Compensation. Right. 3/4 of our panel in my little straw poll thought that at some stage their pay did not keep pace with their male counterparts. Hands up in the audience, who's felt that their pay has suffered versus their male counterparts at some stage in their career? Woohoo. Quite a lot of you. And how many of you went into the boss's office and said something about it? Oh, I'm quite impressed.
Okay,
We're impressed. Tamara, what do you think?
I love it. I think it always, is an issue.
When you respond, is that going to be a nuisance? Because it's quite hard to connect with you. And I've got a really bad neck now.
Come and sit here, please.
Yeah, okay.
No, okay, you could. Yeah, we're happy to.
Why not?
Try that.
Sure.
Go for it.
Try. I may lose speakers. I think pay, is an issue, and again, I think it used to be much more clear cut. When we first started looking at Equalities Act and equal pay issues and those sorts of things, it was much more clear cut. You could look at a job level, woman, man doing same job, woman paid less, clearly. I think it's now much more about politics and the office and who plays the right game and who's clubbable and who's not. And, you look around, I think, as a woman and frequently realize, again, that I'm doing more and getting less recognition. And recognition ultimately, does play into the pay issue. So I think it's always going to be a problem. There are loads of factors to that, though, that are not just about having kids. They're not just about, being a woman in a male environment, but that really do go to our socialization, what people think, assumptions that people make about your time, about your commitments, about your interests, about your capabilities. And so I think we have a long way to go to fix that problem, and it's not one that is fixed by legislation, clearly, because we've got it.
Tamara, though, you told me something very interesting when I spoke to you. You said you just changed jobs.
Oh, I did. Yes, that's true. And I think that's an important point, and I was going to come on to that. But when you think you are being underpaid, one of the things I think women get wrong is we think we can just keep being really good girls, and they'll notice. I'll just be even better at this. I'll do my job, even more perfectly, and I will keep my head down even more, actually, and they're really going to notice how committed I am and what a hard worker I am. Bullshit. Not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. And the best way to really get confidence and to know what you're worth is to go out there and find another job. You don't always have to take it. I could go on and on about what I think about interviewing. That's a skill set. You should hone it. Do it a lot, right? So, talk to headhunters every time they call. Make sure you know them. Know your markets. Know what's going on. But frankly, change jobs. I happened to quit during my maternity leave. So I had another job offer. They had pursued me while I was huge. I was a house, the first interview I had, and they still thought that was a good idea to hire me, which actually made me like them all that much more. So I waited till my child was born to make sure that he was healthy, and then I quit. And so two things. A, I had the most fantastic maternity leave because it was garden leave as well and nobody could bother me. No BlackBerry for the first time in my entire life, so that was brilliant. But secondly, when I came back to my job, nobody knew me as the woman who'd just had a baby. Right? Nobody knew me, as having been on maternity leave. They knew me as, a new partner they'd just hired who'd been on garden leave because, the other firm that was losing her wanted her on garden leave because, that would be important to keep her out of the market. So it looked good. And I think, that's a really important point for all of you. If you're not getting what you deserve at work, then leave. Find somewhere else that will give you what you deserve at work.
Heather, you had an unusual situation of coming out of a public sector pay system into a private one. How did you deal with that?
Actually, twice in my career, I've moved for a pay cut because I thought the job was so interesting and would be so developmental that even though the job was still a CEO level job, I took less money to do it. So I would say it's not always about an inexorable progression upwards. You are building investment in your long-term reward, not just year-on-year reward. Coming into Deloitte, I mean, the public sector, it is fairly transparent. Actually, being a partner in Deloitte, it's entirely transparent. I know what every partner in our firm takes home every year. I know the judgment on which that's been made. I can see their sales performance figures. I can see their revenue contribution. There's a lot of other data that I understand. So it is actually incredibly easy to know and to make a judgment about whether I'm being fairly treated. I think you have to have a level of sophistication not to think that is a year in, year out judgment. In a business like ours, where actually what you're doing is you're building equity in the business, people might be investing in long-term growth opportunities. You have to be able to understand your reward growing almost in a cyclical way, in a 2-3 year sort of rolling assessment of the contribution that you're making. But it does actually make it very easy. It makes it very easy for others to recognise they need to do something about your situation. So there have been a couple of times where I've just got to the point of thinking, am I feeling a bit miffed about this? And as I've been thinking that, I can guarantee on both occasions the CEO will have gone, I think we need to do something about this because it's just getting a bit out of sync. This is what I'm proposing to do about it. And so, you know, kind of the issue's gone away. Now, it's probably slightly gone away because I have been a bit what Tamara says, which is I'm trying to be really, really good and I'm trying to really perform brilliantly, and they will notice. But nevertheless, the good thing is, in my organisation, it is noticed. So I feel okay about that.
Aliya, you're a HR professional. What do you think women can do to make sure their comp keeps pace with their peers through these childbearing years, particularly?
See, I don't think there's a scientific method, and it's a very, very difficult question to answer because there's so many other things here, and I could not agree more with everything that was said. I mean, I've left the job. It's also good to mention that compensation is not just financial, because sometimes you're in a job and you may be paid equal or you just don't care. The pay is not the problem. It's the appreciation, it's the contribution, it's the boss listening to you in the same way that he or she listens to your peer. And again, it's about decisions. It's about taking control of what you can control and not. But like, just directly to answer that question, what I'm seeing a lot back home, and I think globally, is at the very, very basic level, they don't ask for it. A lot of women don't ask for it. They just take that compensation or they take the salary. They don't really, and there's some statistics on it. I just don't have it on hand. But another big one, I think, is women don't necessarily tell their boss what they're doing and how they're doing an amazing job. So when it comes to compensation, guys are really good about sitting with their bosses over lunch and saying, you know, I did this and I killed this and I met this and I didn't. And women are just saying, well, hello, it's obvious, you know? And that's a tricky one because I don't know what it is about us where we're like, it is obvious. I mean, I'm working unbelievably hard and I'm doing all these things and I'm in the office on the weekends if I need to be in. And one advice I got that was really, really good from one of my bosses is be organized about what your contribution has been. Document it, find ways of quantifying it. Now, many things that may be going through your mind is, well, why do I have to bother if my colleague does it? But the point is he does. He does bother. He does do it. He's just more comfortable doing it. So he said, and this was when we had box files. I'm not that old, but there were box files. And I remember he said, here's a box file for every project. I don't want to have a discussion around performance time, what you've done. You bring it. And I think that's one way that you control your pay and your compensation. The other way is definitely leave. Be prepared to walk out. And I really liked what Sally said was, I think she said something about drop dead money. It would be really nice if you had cash in the bank when you made these decisions, but the point is many of us don't necessarily have the cash in the bank, but it's high risk, high reward. So I've left, my husband thinks I'm crazy for doing this, but I left a seriously huge benefit, which was it was a schooling fee. It's massive. It would have taken care of the school fees, but I was so unhappy in the job. I was working with this human being that was just, it was horrible. You know? So emotionally it was difficult. When I came home to my kids, I couldn't focus. I was dreaming of different ways to kill him. But that's not healthy. None of that is healthy. And I left, and okay, the total compensation is probably even maybe a bit less or about on par. But I've seen myself grow in terms of appreciation, access to opportunities, all of these things that can't get quantified into a paycheck. Sorry, I took a bit long there.
Thank you. I think that was interesting. And I think what we've been focusing on is fixing ourselves. But actually, Tamara, I know you think that we should stop fixing ourselves. It's not the women that should be doing the fixing.
We need to fix our system. And I think it's, you could say fix the men, but the reality is, and they are maybe the architects of our system, so we kind of get there in a roundabout way. But I do think, we've spent a lot of the last few years in many organizations setting up, women's mentoring programs, women's networking programs, whatever it may be. But they've all really been designed to fix the women, to get at some of these issues that are legitimate, that I think are legitimate in the sense that we are socialized, for example, to, all of us respond badly to women who are pushy and aggressive and who ask for pay rises. So those are issues we are, attempting to fix when we talk about fixing the women, possibly legitimately. But I think the reality is what we need to do is accept that if organizations are now saying, and they are, and have been for some time, that diversity is a good thing. So we work really hard to bring a diverse group of people in at, the more junior levels. And then why is it when we start talking about moving up the ladder, we focus on the eye of the needle. We want everyone to be exactly the same. We define merit somehow as being some objective thing that everyone can meet in the exact same way to get right up to the top of our corporate ladders. When what we really need to be doing is sitting down and saying, actually, good managers are precisely what you said, managers who can manage a diverse group of people. Managers who can not only manage them, but actually encourage that diversity. So rather than taking, I use my favorite analogy for this, which is, you say you've got a relay race to run, and you need to swim, bike, and run it. So you're going to get the best swimmer, the best cyclist, and the best runner, and you're going to train them all up. What we do in our corporates is then get to the day, and it's the big race. And we look at them and we say, okay, on your mark, get set, run 10K. And so the swimmer and the cyclist are going, what happened? I can't run, I'm not a runner. And that's what we're doing. And so what we need to do is figure out how to say, actually, it is all about all those skill sets, managing them across the board, bringing everyone up to the top with their diversity, not beating their diversity out of them.
Heather, do you think we need quotas?
I am starting to become more of an advocate for quotas. I would hope if we had quotas, we wouldn't need them for so long before we'd actually change that culture, change the system, and would be able to feel confident in needing them anymore. But I've been really fortunate in my career in Deloitte. I think I've been in the firm 2.5 years before I was elected to the governance board, because we had a system where if women weren't elected to the board, there was a special constituency for women candidates. And that was an amazing opportunity for me. That's what enabled me to become a managing partner in the firm. After I'd been there 4 years, I'm on the global leadership team. I can absolutely point to all those things being about was having that particular opportunity for women to be selected, not just by the women constituency, but by all partners, but women being elected to the board. And if we hadn't done that, if I look, obviously several women have been through that route. It is a great way of accelerating talent and creating visibility. I would have loved us not to need it. I would have loved women to be just naturally, and actually they are now. They are naturally elected to the board. So sometimes it's just an open competition for those additional seats. But I think I have to learn from that. I have to think, well, we should have more of those sort of opportunities to pull people up, give them the visibility, almost force women to want to put themselves there, and hopefully that will just accelerate some of the cultural and systemic change that I agree absolutely needs to happen.
I mean, Tamara and Heather are in nice professional services firms that think about these things, but Mary, financial services, will it ever happen, changing the system?
Changing the system? Yes, I believe it will. I think we are at that tipping point where organisations realise they need to make a change, either because they need to look at the talent pool, although I agree it's not quite enough of a burning platform yet. And equally, they don't want, there is an element of name and shame now. I mean, I've done a bit of naming and shaming myself, actually, this morning. you don't want to be shamed. You need to take care of these things as an organisation. So however they get there, and I agree, you know, quotas, if it has the right outcome, then maybe it's the right thing. I don't know, I'm a bit just kind of...
It feels uncomfortable, doesn't it, to be quoted in? Yeah.
But then if it creates opportunities for women, who can then create more opportunities for more women, women get the recognition, the contribution they make is understood, it's high profile, that can only be a good thing. So yes, I think it'll come, but you know, as we saw earlier, there's a long way to go still.
Well, look, actually, we should be feeling a bit more upbeat now than we were a few minutes ago. So I think we've got time for a couple of questions. And then what I'd like to do in the last sort of 1 minute at the very end is just get a top tip from all of our fantastic panel that might help you think about how to get to the top. So some questions, yes? Choose.
I stand up so everyone can see. No, next. Having trouble.
Getting down.
Hi, my name is Philippa Mullet, and I'm in an unusual position in that 10 years ago I started a law firm out in Richmond, which is Western London. And one of the things myself and my business partner were so excited about was because it was a firm that was going to be working, if you like, on site with clients. We would be able to offer legal work to women in particular who could then get to the school gate for 3:30, 4 o'clock. And we thought at the time that we started the business, wow, we're out in Richmond. There must be hundreds of women in London working long hours as lawyers, Tamara, ring bells, who may well want to think, I wonder if, you know, just being able to perhaps do good quality work, but still be able to get home for the kids, that would be a great opportunity. And we were recruiting about 2006, 7, so at the height, if you like, of the city boom. There was an awful lot going on, and it was impossible. We didn't find them at all. And I don't honestly think it was to do with our recruitment strategy or structure, because we did actually find quite a lot of guys, and we found a lot of young people who we took on as articled clerks. But what it taught me was, and I spent a lot of time talking to some of the people who did apply to us about the pay. And it came down to, who would I be if I wasn't being paid the big city salary? And it's about making that balance between what I think I really want and what I actually want. Actually, the pay per hour was pretty much the same, but looked completely on a yearly salary. As a law firm in Richmond, we couldn't match the salaries of law firms in London. And so one of the things I just wanted to say was, we did end up recruiting much younger guys and girls who became articled clerks, who then, as naturally happens, moved on. And I really hope as we move forward that we will be a firm who are there, so that if there are people coming out of the city, particularly, they can think, there are other options of getting really good work. But I need to start thinking about the rewards and the balance and what I'm letting go of in order to have that extra time. There's always a compromise. I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit long.
I think it was extremely interesting. And just to give you a little thing again from the straw poll of the panel here, nobody here actually worked part-time or flexible time during their child-rearing careers. And I think getting the balance right of who and what is important. But it was a really good reflection. Thank you. I think there's somebody else on that side of the room.
Hi. I was just wondering, what advice would you give, let's say, a single mother with 2 children? Because we heard the key success factor behind a mother who wanted to make it big in the corporate world was her partner. But unfortunately, they're women who are single, mothers of 2. What is that one advice that you would give them? Thanks.
Go for it.
It's still a partner.
It is, absolutely.
It's still a partner. It's maybe not a husband or a partner in the most traditional domestic partnership, but it's a partner, it's a friend, it's a mother, it's a nanny. Find that partner that can help you in achieving what you want to achieve, and that's it. I really do strongly believe it's still that partnership, someone you can rely on.
Yeah.
And you have seen examples of women working with you at senior levels who have done this by themselves?
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think you're absolutely right, Aliya. It is, it may be outsourcing in other people's terms, but, I have a couple of examples, within my group of girlfriends where it is great nannies that have stayed with them for a long, long time. It is, extended family. Sometimes it is the ex-husband who, also pitches in. Don't have to be a current husband to still be a partner in child rearing. Sometimes it's the, husband's family if the husband was gone. Sometimes, and in a couple of cases, there was never a husband. So it was always about who you choose to go into, parenting with. But if you're going to work, and frankly, let's be honest, most of us need to in one way or another, then you have to have an ability to have an extended network, something to rely on, that will help you to parent.
Thank you. Should we have another question?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more.
One more, and then we'll go through our summary. Thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot for being here today. My question is around female mentorship, and particularly as you move into more senior roles, and you guys all spoke to the fact that there are so few women at the senior part of a firm. I've struggled in my career to find female mentors because I've only ever actually had the opportunity to work for one woman. And I was wondering what avenues and mechanisms you guys think people can use to find women mentors.
Wendy, do you want to?
Yeah. Critical to have mentors. It's frankly less important whether they're men or women. If you have a mentor, it does make those discussions around pay, promotion, so much easier. But actually the more recent research shows that more important than mentors is to identify a sponsor. And by that, a sponsor is someone who will stick their neck out for you, be your advocate, and with whom you have a relationship of such trust and honesty that you really can talk about your development needs that are going to get you to the next stage. Not the knowledge, the IQ, but the EQ bit. Do I want to do this? What's it going to take? And really helps you hone that purpose. So yes, have a number of mentors. Frankly, preferable to have men rather than women because you need people to think differently from how you think, but critically think about sponsors. And all the evidence is women hate doing that. They think you have to have an incredibly close relationship with somebody to ask them to be a sponsor for you, because typically they're obviously more senior in your organization. It's not like that for guys. It's an ask. What's the worst thing they can say to you? No, can't do it, just out. The worst thing that can happen is that they say no. The best thing that can happen is they say, yes, I'd be delighted. So really thinking about who's my mentors, but who's my sponsors, and that's not as hard an ask for the guys as it is for us. So courage to find them.
Yep. Okay.
I think there are two things about that as well, though. Not only the sponsor in your own organization, which you just can't emphasize enough, but the other thing is, mentorship, the real kind of mentor, find the women that you admire or are interested in their careers, is also a great opportunity to develop not only yourself, but really, frankly, either your business, et cetera. So you see someone doing a job you want to do, go and take them out to coffee and ask them how they did it. Not only can they become a mentor, but frankly, you can learn an awful lot. And they may say, you know how I did it? Well, I started in this job, and actually that's vacant. Why don't you come do it? So you never know where that's going to go. But it's a real opportunity when you say, I want to find a mentor, to actually also further your career and do some great networking.
And I think the other thing now is, who would say no to that?
Absolutely.
Male or female? Yeah, absolutely.
Always flattered.
Go for it.
Thank you. So shall we have a top tip from each of our panel now for you to take away? Heather.
My top tip is learn to feel comfortable with making some choices, understanding you can't have it all, and feeling comfortable with where you're choosing to be selfish, because there has to be some bit of this where feeling all right about what might feel a bit selfish is going to be fundamental to your ability to happily balance the components you're choosing. But you can't have it all. None of us here have it all. It might look like it, believe us, we don't have it all.
I'm going to be a bit greedy. I've written a few things down here, but I would first of all say absolutely do something that you love and that you're passionate about, because it is far easier to shine and differentiate yourself if you're doing something that you love. I would say make sure that you send out the right signals. If you're ambitious and you want to get to the top, and you know most of the room raised their hands at that question, then make sure the people round about you, above you, absolutely know that, so that they'll pull you up. Work smart. It's not always about trying to work harder and be a good girl, even though we probably all are very tempted to do that. Try and work really smart. Make sure people know what you've done. And say yes to those opportunities that will be out there, maybe coming at you from left field. You know, learn to say yes and take the opportunity, because it will build you.
Very similar themes. There's a great, I think, Australian phrase about we're all going to get to the beach sometime. It comes from surfing, and that means, you know, we will all eventually be 100. And so my advice is, take half a day a month, no BlackBerry, nothing electronic, that's entirely you time, half a day, and think about, if I was 99 going on 100, if I was 99, how would I feel about this? And by that I mean, take a half day where you think, if I was 99, where would this rate? Am I on track? Am I not on track? What's it going to take? Because if you don't put yourself at the top of your agenda, nobody else is going to do it for you. And it is phenomenally difficult for women to carve out even a tiny amount of time just to think. And the answer probably isn't with a mentor or a sponsor. It's probably inside. You just need that half a day a month, devoid of anything electronic, to think, does this feel like I'm on track for the beach I want to get to at 100, not at 50.
Thank you. Aliya.
For me, it's be conscious of your ecosystem. You are part of an ecosystem, and when you think about plans or strategy, you always use models like Porter's, where you look at the things that surround you and the things that will contribute to your success. So I go back to develop excellent partnerships throughout that circle that supports you. This means your boss or the management in your organizations. If you're thinking about another ecosystem, then think about who exists around that industry or business or role that you can develop an excellent partnership around. And it's really kind of thinking win-win. I want to get something out of whatever it is, and it's for you to define and for you to create and for you to carve out the space and everything that everyone said. But it's those partnerships that will support you down the line, whether it's emotionally, socially, or professionally. And that's really important for me, and especially the environment I operate in, being a very integrated society.
Thank you. Tamara.
I would say try to be challenged every day. Women don't get ahead. In fact, nobody gets ahead by sitting in a comfort zone. So, you know, sit down and think every day, what happened to me today that really took me outside my comfort zone? And if nothing happened to you that took you outside your comfort zone, find something that will. And I guess my final thing would be, you know, one of my favorite quotes of all time came from one of my favorite ladies, Madeleine Albright, who said there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. Don't go to hell, right?
Thank you very much, panel. See, I told you at the beginning it was your lucky day, didn't I, coming here today? I know you're going to agree with me. Thank you very, very much.